It started out normal and bright. That's how the whole day would be until night, right? I was bored. My sister, oddly enough, didn't want much to do with me. Dad was busy, and Mom told me to leave her alone because she was busy. Apparently, nobody wanted me around. I searched the dark recesses of my mind, thinking about the past, and maybe if I toyed with some things in the past, I wouldn't be so bored or lonely. I sat and thought. I thought hard, but then I had remembered. Toontown. Now excuse my logic here, but why would I care? That was such a long time ago. It was a game for kids, and wouldn't they have cancelled my old account anyway? I tried to think about something else. My thoughts were moving deeper. Toontown. I kept trying. Toontown. My thoughts were racing, and so was my heart. Toontown. Some voice kept putting the word Toontown in my head. I gave up and decided to try. I hopped onto my computer and opened Internet Explorer. I then went to the search bar and punched in Toontown. Everything looked normal as usual on the site, but I couldn't help but notice one thing. On the page to sign in, there was a blue dog pointing at the login, and his looks were familiar. I couldn't quite recall the name, and I was a bit disturbed by the fact his gloved hand pointed at the login that actually had my login name and my password already wrote in. Not only that, but the dog stared at me, just smiling, waiting for me to click the login. That's strange, I thought out loud. I was sure, being this was years ago, as far as 2005, my password and login would have been long terminated. Oh well. Despite I didn't care for this childhood game, I let nostalgia take over nonetheless, and I pressed login. I waited in silence as it was just a black screen. No loading Toontown, no cheery music. My gut sank. I felt like I shouldn't have logged in, but I tried to ignore myself anyway. It didn't help because when the tune boxes came up, the hues seemed off and the colors looked saturated. I felt my heart sink when none of my tunes showed up, but a blue dog. What was his name? Oh yeah, Flippy. I was greeted with his name under his icon head. Nervously, I clicked on him. It didn't even take the time to load. I jumped instantly. Flippy and I were in Toontown Central, but it didn't look like Toontown Central. Everything was lonely, decaying, nobody but Flippy and I. I swallowed hard when I began to hear music slowly play. In reverse, it was a reversed version of Toontown Central's theme. I hit the forward arrow key, making a move forward. The sounds of movement were pretty normal. I wondered why the town looked like this, why it was so desolate, but that wasn't the worst. Everything quickly spiraled downhill. I headed Flippy into one of the streets, and in the streets the buildings were decaying, ablaze, and the fire hydrants and trees destroyed. But there was also oil with the heads of cogs sitting around at points, namely flunkies. Their eyes were wide, almost hyper-realistic, their jaw agape, all their heads staring as if they had seen something horrible before their death. I knew they weren't living things, but how did they make such painted, terrified expressions? I think what disturbed me more was their heads lying around on and off the street, staring in horror. Rather than why they made the expression, I came around the corner to a burning Toon HQ in the middle of the street. My heart sunk in terror. I couldn't move Flippy any farther. I tried, and all he did was shake his head no. Burning. A speech bubble appeared with the Toon dog barking sounds. Not a colored one like chosen dialogue, but a secret friend's bubble. This dialogue could only be done if it was typed. I became terrified. My first reaction was to X out the game. I clicked. It wouldn't. I clicked again. I couldn't leave the game. I clicked multiple times with no result. I could feel the fear welling up in my chest. My thoughts on whether or not Cog's lived charged entirely, and the sweat on my forehead as Flippy turned to face me. All he did was look at me with sadness. I pressed my chair back in shock. Suddenly, appearing in the Bossbot Cog HQ, everything was graying. Nobody was there. But surprisingly, the buildings were intact. I was no longer controlling Flippy, but he himself was running toward a cog. Again, a flunky. What was the fascinations with flunkies? I asked myself in my mind. I gritted my teeth hard when Flippy turned to me. All he did was glare at me. No, grr, or no bending and bawling at the fist, just glaring. Faces was all he said, again in a white bubble. A smile slowly animated onto his face. Chills ran down my spine. I wanted to run from my computer screen, but I was glued to the screen, being held hostage by this horrible nightmare. He chased the flunky and it ran, but he ran faster than I did. I was hoping when he got the cog, and that he was going to pie it to death. I laughed nervously at the thought. At least that was what I hoped. My hopes were destroyed as I watched him tackle and pin it. The flunky struggled vigorously, but with no result of escape. I choked back, spit once more as I watched Flippy pull out a saw, sawing off its legs. This time, oil didn't spill out, but blood and veins did. I watched as he violently tied a rope around the cog's neck, pulling it across the desolate grounds. Flippy entered the Boss Spot HQ with it. The inside of the building was on fire, and I could hear rather real-sounding screams. I wanted to cry out for help, but my voice had left me. Again, all I could do was watch as he pulled the flunky up a flight of steps. It began in voice bubbles for Flippy to let him go. At the top of the steps was only 4 tiles of space and railings. It was high up over the flames. I watched as Flippy hauled the flunky forcefully, cornering it by the rail. This time, Flippy stabbed the flunky with a screwdriver. I covered my ears in fear as the sounds of high-pitched male screaming came from the speakers. I began to breathe hard. I could only feel my heart pounding, but that wasn't all he did. Oh no. He pulled out a drill and applied it to the flunky's head. It continued to scream, this time distorting, blood flying from his head. When Flippy decided he's had enough fun with the drill, he grabbed the end of the rope, tossing the flunky over the rail. He held the rope with his own strength as a brutal snap was heard. He hanged the cog. I was disturbed by everything I just witnessed. The death sounded like sounds from a real murder, but distorted. I knew now I couldn't predict anything that would happen. And that being said, I was right. Suddenly, we appeared in an area that didn't exist on the map. It was a long stretch of dark, cloudy land. It was grassy land, and far away in view was a hill with a single tree. Bodies of Toons and cogs lie all around, dead, bloody, guts stranded all around, all of which looked realistic. Flippy didn't move. I knew Flippy could hear me, aloud or in thoughts. I gave up, and with trembling I spoke. Why? I asked, holding back tears. The sounds of murder I just heard was getting to me. It played like a record in my head over and over again. Flippy started running forward, and his head slowly turned all the way around to face me. I was horrified. His eyes were hollow, blood running from them, blood-covered face. His mouth was disfigured. His jaw hung sideways, his teeth exposed and crooked. Bloody wounds riddled his face, and it looked as if half of his face was burned. First, his twisted face grinned at me. Didn't you think it was funny? I shook my head. I couldn't speak. His eyes expressed sadness. The further and further his body ran, the darker and grayer the screen got, and more dead bodies appeared. A few more moments of running, he spoke again. Look at what you have done to this beautiful place. All of these people. Flippy's sad expression never changed as his speech bubble appeared to me. I never did anything, I shouted at the screen. A twisted grin slowly came onto his face again. Accept your fate. I wanted to question it. I couldn't. I only watched as he made pained, tuned dog sounds, running towards the Hillin tree. The screen was getting darker. His health was becoming less. Eventually, he was making the actual sounds of a pained, dying dog. His body began to look frail. Then he fell on his knees near the tree. He had finally died, laying his body in the grass. The bodies near the tree looked that their eyes were hollow. The loud sounds of fires startled me, and I jumped a bit when fire appeared all around them. The world was burning, ending because I started the game. The game closed itself out, and I rushed to reboot my computer. Now my computer has been rebooted. I'll never see Flippy again. I never want to. I don't even want to think of Toontown ever again.